That in this summer, summer, summer,
Welcome back to After the Midnight.
This week we're discussing the title track off of Endless Summer.
To get a better understanding of how this track came to be, here's Tyler and Tim on Beyond Synth number 89.
We started together in a room. Tim had sort of the beginnings of the track, and I just sat and wrote the words out, and then we demoed the vocals, and then Tim sort of built out the track from there. But I mean, it was a pretty quick process, Endless Summer. I think I only had a few hours that night to work because I was in LA for only a few days. But yeah, that one started organically, the old-fashioned way with the two of us in a room together, and Tim, did like he normally does the majority of the actual hours working on the track.
That was one of the first songs that we did for the, quote unquote new album, but it was almost 2 years ago. So because I had just moved to a new studio, I remember in North Hollywood, and it had been a while since we were in the room together. So I think it was like February of 2015. So I remember just having the chord progression, and Tyler just pretty quickly wrote out these different verses, and how I used to do that, I then take it and move them around and build the track from there. And it could have become a 2-minute song, or as it ended up being, I don't know, I think it's like 6 minutes, because I just wanted to feel like a progressive feeling where it just kind of felt dreamy, and there wasn't really a chorus, it was just more of a vibe. And I think the same night we actually also wrote Vampires.
That's right.
So we did all that in a couple of hours, really. It was pretty fast. Those are the demo vocals. Those are just the vocals that we did. That the vibe was right, and it was just pretty simple. And then the work comes in for me afterwards, where I have to work on the track, which is where I really like to dig in. And I like to, I'll have a basic idea for Tyler to write to, but generally I always like to have the vocals before I really dig into the production, because I have to know what I'm building it around.
It's interesting to hear in that clip that with this being the first song on this album, it was actually the first song that they started writing for. And I think in that writing process, like Tyler said in that clip, things went really fast. It went back to the very beginnings of them being in a room together. I know Tim said in that clip that it was the first time that they had been in a room together for a while. So it's interesting that it almost reminds me of kind of the process of like We Move Forward and Kick Drums and Red Wine, and the fact that the lyrics are very simple, very straightforward. And like Tim said in that clip, there's not a whole lot of structure to the song. It kind of just builds on itself and has that same progressive feel that we got in a few songs on Days of Thunder.
I felt like this song, there's not a whole lot of lyrics.
No.
It's mostly instrumental. And I guess before we started this and I listened to it a lot, in my head I was just thinking it was instrumental with a few of the vocal robot stuff that he had.
I thought it was cool to hear that in one session Tyler demoed out those vocals. They started on Vampires. It sounds like in that, like Tim said, the vibe was right that night. They got a lot of sort of roots started for this, record, in the fact that Tim said he just had a chord progression, and then Tyler came in and wrote to it, and then Tim built this really complex track around it. As we get into listening to this song, there's a lot of synthesizers. We hear a lot of arpeggiators going. We definitely hear some things that Tim hasn't touched on before up to this point. You can definitely hear the familiar elements there of his producing style, but I also think that we get a lot more of a vintage feel in this, from the beginning sample to the tape distress to the sound quality of the synthesizers. It just feels very soaked in nostalgia, even more so than before.
And as we said at the end of the last episode, when we were talking about this whole album, it was really a lot more cohesive, and I think this just really sets the tone of the album. It's a really great intro track. Like you said, he used his familiar elements, but he also built on that, and we get more of what makes the Midnight on this whole album, as well as this song.
it's cool that besides just them right off the bat, you know, we get a feature, we get a familiar collaborator someone who comes to be a familiar collaborator. We hear Thomas on the saxophone, you know, as we get into this too. So it's cool that, you know, they were able to work together again and bring those elements into the listening experience so early.
Yeah, the sax is so subtle on this. Like, whenever I thought of the song, I didn't even realize there was a sax, because it's more in the instrumental. It's not so, you know, I don't think it's actually a sax solo. It's just built into the instrumental, and it works well. Since this is the intro track, I think he was just trying to say, you know, this album, it's gonna have some sax. I'm just gonna give you a little taste of it here.
Yeah, it's very, very subtle.
The new thing with this album is I think he plays with vocals a lot more. On Days of Thunder, we didn't get any vocal manipulation. It was just straightforward Tyler. And here we get he used a voice generator to come up with some elements that make it sound a bit more computer, a bit more nostalgic, probably for that era of, you know, the 80s.
Yeah, it definitely is a theme that we hear. You know, I mean, the first words spoken on this album are that computer voice, and then we definitely hear that theme, you know, carried throughout this album. And as we get further into the Midnight's catalog, I mean, it's definitely something that Tim, I think, is kind of known for. But yeah, I just the message that's said right there, I mean, it's a cool sounding but very computer sounding voice, and it's cool to just start it that way. And with what that computer voice says, Tim said on an AMA, like right around the time that the album came out, he talked about where the name Endless Summer came from and kind of what inspired that. And he said that he watched this surf documentary, The Endless Summer, and that it gave him this yearning for summer never to end. And when he asked Tyler to try and write over this track idea I had, he was really inspired, and it just felt right. And then it just felt right to call the EP/album that. So I thought that was just kind of interesting too. You know, like when people think of summer, they think of sunny skies, beaches, water. You know, to be watching like a surf documentary of all things and just be like, I never want summer to end. Like, let's just run with that idea, and to, you know, call the first song that, and then have that turn into the album. I mean, it just, that theme just carries throughout the whole thing, you know?
Yeah, and I feel the Endless Summer, I almost feel like, is ingrained into us from when we're kids. I mean, a lot of kids these days don't really get a full summer break from school, but, you know, us growing up, I mean, getting out on summer break and just being able to play with your friends all summer was the best thing. So if you listen to our Los Angeles episode, we were able to break down the songs using the stems that they released, and we were actually able to get the stems for this entire album. As we play the song, we're going to highlight some tracks to give you a better idea of the structure of the song, and so you can hear instruments more clearly. With that, let's get into it. So the Endless Summer arpeggiator here.
Should have known at the end of summer, the innocence fades and the weak become stronger. Should have known at the end of summer I'd be lost without you.
The skyline looked like a stained glass window. The city sang such mad crescendo. 4 bare feet on a rain-soaked street. Summer air brushed fever dreams.
So this is the Endless Summer theme synth. That's actually what the name of the stem is. I personally like this note progression a lot here because that synth follows the saxophone and some other instruments, so it's one of the main melody builders in this song. Very vintage sounding too.
This is the Drone Sun synth. kind of has a driving sound to it. So that's the dreamy synth track, and I think it really carries a lot of the track as far as like the melody.
Okay, so this is actually the DX7 spill. For those who aren't familiar, the DX7 is a really popular Yamaha vintage synthesizer that was very popular in the 80s. Literally feels like you're diving head first into a video game.
So this is the deep down pad. It's got a real dreamy sound to it.
Disappeared in a camera flash. Why do the bad girls never last? Lost in gin and lemonade, electro spins in the mermaid parade.
So this is the sax right here, performed by Mr. Thomas Edinger.
This stem is called the Tangerine Dreamy Parts, and it's really the kind of Japanese sound that we hear right here. It's also interesting because the first time we hear this kind of Japanese kind of influence is in the first track on Days of Thunder, and this is the first track of Endless Summer.
Summer, the innocence fades and the weak become stronger. Should have known at the end of summer I'd be lost without you.
4 quartets and no regrets, except for the Polaroids I left. You were just some spell I was under. That in this summer, 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 summer.
I also wonder if the Japanese influence, like, for anyone that knows the Midnight and knows like Mono No Aware, you know, the saying that they really is a big part of them, their whole philosophy. Like I wonder if it's a subtle nod, you know, to that's kind of what they live by, you know, Mono No Aware, and with that being Japanese. Or I wonder if this was intentional or accidental, or, you know, how that came to be. But that's a good point. I didn't realize that's like a running theme now on track 1 of Days of Thunder and track 1 of Endless Summer, is that we get that vibe. That's cool.
I like the lyric, disappeared in a camera flash. Why do the bad girls never last? I feel like that first line has a double meaning. The disappeared in a camera flash, meaning that the moment, maybe the summer went by really fast. But I also like that it alludes to a camera because, a camera records memories. So it's like this moment in time went by fast, but I remember the moment. He also talks about Polaroids later on, which is very, the 80s era. Maybe, cameras were a lot more accessible then.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that they were definitely a staple of the 80s, and then just the whole candid feel of Polaroids, like the fact that, it was meant to be something that was just literally captured in the moment. Like, you take the photo, you pull it out, you have that, so it's just, and in the moment they're so candid, and you may not think of, these are going to be memories that I hang on to forever, but then you're able to look back on those Polaroids, afterwards, and you have those memories tied to it. And I think that even if you just think of synthwave or the Midnight or what they're doing, I mean, it's very much that reaching back, nostalgia, recalling those memories that either existed or didn't, whether it's in a story or whether it really happened. I also love just the two perspectives that we really get in the lyrics. It's like we hear the computer voice talk about, should have known at the end of summer I'd be lost without you, and then you hear Tyler come in to end the song. It's just like, you were some spell I was under, that endless summer. And I just think it's interesting, that difference between those two. It's like you getting one perspective of this longing, almost like, what do I do once this is over? Should have known at the end of summer I'd be lost without you. And then you have this other person who's almost like ready to get away from that situation.
Yeah, I'd like to know if Tyler wrote that part, or if Tim wrote it, or if it was a collaboration between the two of them. Tyler usually writes all the lyrics, but since this is a computer voice, was this, an afterthought? After they were out of the studio when Tim was working on this, did he add that part, or did Tyler actually record this part and they decided to put it in a different computer voice to kind of give that perspective back and forth? That'd be interesting to know.
Yeah, no, I just wonder sometimes how those decisions are made, and it's something I've thought about a lot with the Midnight. When you look at their whole catalog that we've heard up to this point, like even releases that we haven't gotten to yet, but using these kind of computer vocals and like the vocal manipulation, I think becomes a theme that we see Tim dive really deep into in some future releases. I mean, even outside of just a computer voice, he pitch bends a lot of stuff and really, really likes to play with vocals. And I wonder how much collaboration goes on between them when they do that. It'd be interesting to know.
It's interesting to think about that when you're listening to this, because it's kind of his first time playing around with it, or at least the first time that we hear In the Midnight. So you had to think about, this is kind of where he started that little, where he started that dive into the vocal effects, and to just hear how he's played with it even more and more.
Yeah, and I think it's cool that he is so open to it, because I don't want to talk too much about future releases, but we even hear Tyler use a lot of vocoder and stuff like that in later songs. Multi-layered vocals where he just adds to that aesthetic. This computer voice that's here, really, if you think about that theme, really, really carries throughout the rest of their discography up to this point. Like, some form of a digital voice or manipulated voice is definitely a theme that you'll continue to hear. Whether they meant to write it from two perspectives or not, I wonder if that was intentional, but I think that that's cool that we get kind of the positive, the longing that I think everyone's felt, and then the I'm ready to move on from this situation into something else that I think, people can relate to that too. just so many sounds and layers. Like, I love that, you know, we get the sample to start the song off of the tape, and then it just explodes into this just sonic wonderland, for lack of a better word. Like, we get so many arpeggiators and just so much stuff that's new. Great start. Really excited to be into season 2. I hope you guys enjoyed our first season and the new approach that we're going to take on this one. I know I'm super pumped. I know you are too. So
this track was definitely fun to dive into. We heard a lot of new sounds from Tim, kind of a new direction. It sets the stage for the album sound-wise and theme-wise. As you're saying, you know, Sunset really fits into this theme. So yeah, speaking of Sunset, that is our next track. Sunset's a real great anthem for the fans. Lots of great songs on here. So yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Yep. See you guys next week.